never stays a day. A bad luck's always coming my way.
Kind of an odd man, and he didn't say much. He seemed like kind of a mama's boy. I always was kind of afraid of him, actually. He scared me a lot, and I heard him and his mother argue quite a bit, all the time.
Why do you think you were spared any of the violence?
Well, I believe it was the brother we built her while he was living here. And he used to sit here and watch, and I think she made it possible that he couldn't touch us.
You think the Blessed Mother was looking over you?
Oh, definitely.
How do the neighbors feel? Do they all know about it now?
Well, some do, and some are not aware of it yet.
He was an average person. He blended in with everybody. I mean, he talked a lot. When we had a barbecue down here in the backyard last July. But the only time he didn't talk too much was when, like, if I'd meet him in the garage by myself, or he was coming in and I was going out, or the other way around, all he would say is hi, and that was it. But if you tried to start a conversation with him, it was kind of useless, you know. He never really volunteered anything. So.
How do you feel now that you found out he was a neighbor?
Scared still, because he really was a neighbor. I lived right next door in the next apartment next to him. And it just gives me the creeps is kind of an understatement.
He was a nice guy, this 24-year-old giant. Edmund Kemper never bothered his neighbors on this Alameda Street, paid his rent, and went his own way. Except for his 6'9", 280-pound frame, he could have gone unnoticed.
For today's grim adventure, we find ourselves in Santa Cruz, California. Today we're going to be talking about the serial killer Ed Kemper, who's one of the killers here in Santa Cruz that kind of gave this place the name, the murder capital of the world. When I say the name Santa Cruz, the first thing you probably think of is the movie The Lost Boys, because after all, in the movie, Santa Cruz is known as the vampire capital of the world. But in real life, like I said, it's called the murder capital of the world. And the reason for this, from 1970 to 1973, there were 2 serial killers and a mass murderer here. Crazy, right? For the longest time, the murders here in Santa Cruz seemed so random. I mean, after all, there was a priest that was stabbed to death in a confessional. Teens who were camping, kind of like in the woods that we are in right now, were killed. Female co-eds who disappeared after hitchhiking. And for the longest time, the authorities didn't even realize that they had multiple serial killers. It was chaotic.
This spot is just a stone's throw from the Santa Cruz campus of the University of California. These redwood forests sweep up over a ridge and then down to the town of Felton. It's not far from here that just a week ago today, 4 more bodies were discovered in a connected series of murders that now numbers at least 10. There is a theory that the thickly wooded hillsides here may be hiding other bodies. It is known that there are campsites and perhaps even rude cabins in this virtual wilderness, part of which, ironically, is known as the Garden of Eden. The only way to find out whether more murders are hidden here is to go in and look. For that purpose, 13 members of the Santa Cruz Sheriff's Posse have assembled here this morning to conduct a massive search. A Sheriff's Explorer group affiliated with the Boy Scouts is assisting in the Santa Cruz search. The boys now have with them for the first time newly acquired radios designed for just this use. 25-year-old Herbert Mullen has been charged with 10 of the Santa Cruz murders. The house in which he lived until 3 weeks ago is just a few minutes' walk from here. There are also a number of unsolved murders in this area. 4 of these victims were co-eds from nearby UC. At least 2 other young women are missing and feared dead.
Now this is a picture of Ed Kemper, also known as the co-ed killer. Now, if you're a fan of true crime, then chances are you're familiar with his story, but just in case you're not, let me tell you a little bit about him. He was 6'9". Well, I should say is 6'9" because Ed Kemper is still alive. Even just recently in 2024, he was up for parole, but he was denied. If you're a fan of the TV show Mindhunter, he was featured in that, as well as all kinds of other documentaries. But Ed Kemper himself, living here in Santa Cruz, people loved him. They thought of him as like a gentle giant. People that knew him called him Big Ed. I have a feeling that while telling the story of Ed Kemper, we're going to be jumping around a little bit, so just bear with me. But before we get into all of it, I want to point out one thing. The people that gave Ed Kemper his nickname, Big Ed, because he was a gentle giant, was the Santa Cruz Police Department. You see, Ed Kemper, he wanted to be a police officer, but he kept getting denied, mainly because he was 6'9". He was considered too big. So he would actually hang out at a bar down in Santa Cruz called the Jury Room. We're going to go to it a little bit later on. At the time, back in the 70s, it was known as a police bar. He would go there, he would hang out, and even whenever he was killing co-eds, he would go there and listen to the police officers and see if they had any leads. It's kind of like sleeping with the enemy. I mean, he wasn't sleeping with them, but you get the idea. To try to better understand the mind of Ed Kemper, you kind of have to go back to his childhood. You see, out of all the different serial killers that have happened throughout history, Ed, Big Ed, is probably one of the ones that is most well documented with interviews. The man has spoken a lot about his crimes. And he himself has said that it pretty much all started with his mother. To put it simply, he absolutely hated, despised his mother because of mental and physical abuse. For this video, we're not going to delve deep into Ed's childhood. Instead, we're going to pretty much focus on what got him caught, the last bits of his crime spree. But we do have to go back a little bit. And for this, we're going to go back to whenever Ed was 15 years old, whenever he killed his grandparents. Him and his mother didn't have the greatest relationship. The mother wanted nothing to do with him, and she sent him off to live with his grandparents. And for whatever reason, I think I read he wanted to see what it was like to kill grandma. He killed both of his grandparents, and he was shipped off to like a mental hospital where he was pretty much there till he was 18 years old. Psychologists didn't want him released, but they released him anyway. He was like a model patient, a model prisoner, if you will. And they released him into the custody of his mother, the same woman that Ed was saying was mentally and physically abusing him. Again, we're going to be spending the entire day here in the Santa Cruz area, visiting some of the locations that have to deal with the end of the Ed Kemper crime spree. Usually whenever we come up here, it's like filming locations like The Lost Boys or Jordan Peele's Us, or a nice day at the boardwalk. Today, it's all about true crime. Today is the story of Ed Kemper. We now find ourselves in the heart of Santa Cruz at the Jury Room, which again, back in the day, this was considered a cop bar. And Ed Kemper used to hang out here, and this is where he got the nickname Big Ed. In fact, we were in there, we went inside, we asked if we could film inside here, and they said no. And some of the patrons who were sitting at the bar, they're like, oh yeah, the old story with Kemper, Big Ed. So they still call him that, because again, back then, he was kind of considered like the gentle giant before everything came to light.
And all this time, Kemper was able to seem normal. He even hung out at a bar across the street from the courthouse, making friends with policemen, trying to pick up information.
They'd buy me a beer, I'd buy them a beer. Casual relationships, but I was poking around a little bit trying to find some things out. I knew they wouldn't be privy to hot information, but there were some things that were bothering me, like were there any speculations on how they were dying?
Even though technically we can't take the cameras inside, it's still pretty wild to be standing here knowing that part of the Ed Kemper story was here, that he was actually inside this bar with police officers, listening to him, talking about the case, trying to like figure out if they had any kind of leads, if anything would point to them. Now, I did find this very interesting. You know, I was out there filming at the front entrance, and I can hear the patrons inside, the guys sitting at the bar, talking about Kemper. I heard, you know, Kemper at least 3 or 4 different times. So let's see here. When it comes to Kemper, all in all, there was 10 victims. His 2 grandparents at the age of 15. There were the 6 co-eds here in Santa Cruz, and then his mom and her best friend. Now we're gonna go and visit where his mom was living, where he was actually living with his mom, and killed both of them in just a little bit. But one more thing I want to talk about here before we leave is after he killed his mom and her best friend, he left town. And I think for 4 days, he was listening to the news, seeing if anybody was talking about any of the murders, seeing if he was caught, seeing if they knew it was him. And there was nothing. So he actually stopped at a payphone and he called the jury room and talked to his friends, his police friends. And he told them, hey, I killed my mom. They didn't believe him. I mean, come on, after all, it was Big Ed. It was the gentle giant. So they hung up. He called back and said, no, seriously, I killed my mother and I've done this. And that's ultimately how he was caught. Now, baby girl, I don't want to get too in depth with what Kemper did to his victims, because let me just say that it is downright disgusting. Absolutely disgusting. There's not even words to describe how disgusting it was. But I will say this. He would kidnap them, kill them in whatever way possible. Often he would have sex with the corpses. He would dismember them, cut off body parts. He would decapitate, have sex with the head. I mean, there's no easy way of saying that. That's just the brutal facts of it. And each victim, especially when it came to the co-eds here in Santa Cruz, each victim was just as disturbingly gruesome as the one before. If you want to learn more about that, what Kemper did, by all means, read up on it. We're just showcasing the locations, that it's a real place here in Northern California. We are going to talk about his mother, though. If you've been watching our channel for a while, then you know that every time that we go somewhere to film that has a sensitivity about it, like a crime scene or something, we always ask for permission. Basically, it also let people know that we're standing out front with a camera, not doing anything nefarious, just remembering, walking history. So this house right here is where Ed Kemper's mom was living. And I think, if I remember correctly, Ed was actually living with her for a little bit at this point. But that door right there, the one with the Christmas wreath, 609A, which is the bottom right-hand side, that's where she was living. She came home, and Ed was here. And again, the relationship between Ed and his mom was very, very strained. And he waited for her to go to bed, and he went into her room, and he hit her over the head with a claw hammer.
And that's when I decided I'm going to murder my mother. I knew a week before she died I was going to kill her. And she went out to a party, she got soused, she came home, went to sleep. I was woken up by that, came out. I walked up to her bed. She's laying there reading a paperback. And she said, "Oh, I suppose you're going to want to sit up all night and talk now." And I looked at her, I said, "No." I said, "Good night." And I knew I was going to kill her, you know? And I'm so cold, it's so hard. And that's the first time in 10 years I've looked at it that way. I mean, that intensely, that honestly. It hurts, because a lizard. I'm not from under a rock. I came out of her vagina. See?
Decapitated her, put her head on a shelf, and spent the next hour or so screaming at it and playing darts, like throwing darts at his mom's face.
I cut off her head, and I humiliated her corpse. It's there, you know? A 6 young woman dead because of the way she raises her son and the way her son is raised, the way he grows up. And what's her closing words? I suppose you want to sit up all night and talk. God, I wish I had.
Then he called her best friend over and said, hey, me and Mom would like to have you over for dinner. So she came over. And he did the same thing to her, killed her and put her in the closet as well. Ed takes off, and somewhere in Colorado, like I was saying, he's watching the news, seeing if anybody, caught on. But nobody, nothing. It was just silent. The news was silent. So he called the jury room and said, hey, this is what I did, and told them to come here. And they didn't believe him at first. Pretty wild. Now, there's one other thing that we want to show you. Aside from Kemper's mother and her best friend, another one of Kemper's victims was a girl by the name of Cynthia Ann Shaw. She went by Cindy. Now, Kemper killed her by shooting her in the head once. And then he took her body back to his mother's house where he cleaned her up in the bathtub. And then he had his way with her, for lack of better words. And then he decapitated her, had his way with her head. And then he buried Cindy's head in the backyard, right below his mother's window. And he positioned it in such a way that it was looking, the head was looking up at his mother. Now, this is where the head was buried. You can see where that shed is, and here's a picture. It's a crime scene photo. It's crazy to think that a family with kids lives here. But life goes on. This really is one of those stories, one of those crimes that the more you know about it, the more you find out about it, the more you listen to Ed Kemper talk, the more disturbing it gets. Of course, things change over time. And usually whenever it comes to crime scene places like this, they either get torn down because people want to forget, but it's still here, and the family that lives here now has been very nice to allow us to come over here and film. I did ask, of course I had to ask about the closet where Kemper put his mom and her best friend. Didn't think they'd let me in, they did not, which is perfectly fine, but they said you can take as many photos outside as you want. The next stop on our Kemper tour brings us to what I'm guessing was the police impound, because after Kemper was arrested, they brought his car, the same car that he used to kidnap and transport the bodies of his victims, to this lot. We found something very interesting over here, right over by the bay doors. So it says this establishment is registered with the State Department of Consumer Affairs. And this plaque on here says Ronald Reagan, the governor, well before he was president. So this is the right spot, 1971. So if we back up this way and go ahead and walk down Baby Goal, Like I said, there was video and pictures. In the video, you really can't tell where they're at, but there are pictures that show this building in the background while the police officers and the investigators are going through Kemper's car. From right about there. And in it, if you look at some of the pictures, you can see this wall and these tall vertical windows in the shots. So Kemper's car would have been somewhere behind Jessica. You can see that fence over there in the sunlight. Right now we're standing in the shade. But what's interesting is all of the buildings that are around where we're standing right now have either been replaced or rebuilt or remodeled. But this one, the one with the windows, still remains the same. And it even has that metal plaque on it that Jessica, that we were pointing out. In some of the pictures, you can see some of the houses, some of the buildings on the other side of the car. Those are gone. They look like they match up, but nope. This has to have been the impound lot for the Santa Cruz Police Department, well, the Sheriff's Department back in the 70s. Because right over there, about the center of your screen, is where they brought the car and they were going through it. And then if I turn the camera right over this way, this is the police station. Don't know if that's the original police station from back whenever Kemper was here, but it's definitely the current police station. The entire time that we've been here, there's been cop cars going in and out. And with that being said, thank you for joining us on another grim adventure, this time to Santa Cruz, California, also known as the murder capital of the world. Until next time, happy Halloween.
Wherever I come, bad luck is coming my way. Wherever I go, hard luck is there to stay. Good luck never stays a day. Bad luck's always coming my way.